Good evening. So, whether you call me Bobby or Bob, as long as my dad was alive, I was Bobby. Makes sense, right? Now that he's dead, I could become Bob, but I choose not to. I'm old enough now. I think I like Bobby because makes sense. So, I think we have a slide coming up here. There we go. We were just talking about my father, and it's a lot of you tell me, a lot of you know who I am, not because you know me, but because you think I look like somebody, my father, and that's kind of fun. I used to take that as an insult when I was younger, but now I've decided he's better looking than I was, and I am. So now I think it's maybe a compliment. My father, he did pass away just 2 months ago, and I have, people have offered their sympathies, but really, it's not sad for me. He had Alzheimer's for 10 years, for one, but more so than that is I know where he's at, and I really came to understand in a much, much deeper way God's love. It's been maybe 20 years now. No, it hasn't been that long. I was thinking time flies faster. It's been about 15 years. I was in a La Quinta, and I have always struggled with the idea that, I should say the emotion of God loving me. I always believed it. I was raised in church, and I never doubted that God loved me, but just having that emotional, that connection, that does God, that feeling that God loves me, just was really hard to get that to resonate with me. So I was in a La Quinta, and there was, I got up early in the morning. My wife was still asleep, and I didn't want to wake her up, of course, so I don't turn any lights on. And in La Quintas, they have blockout curtains, and you can't see any light coming in at all, so it's completely dark in the room. But in this case, it wasn't, because there was this pinhole in the blockout curtain. And this little pinhole, it was just a little tiny thing, was allowing all this light to come through. And I could see around the room, and I was kind of irritated that there was this little tiny pinhole. And as I sat there and reflected upon this pinhole and the amount of light that was coming in, I started to think about God's love. And I started to think, I wonder if that's kind of like how God's love is, that we really only get to see just a pinhole of what his love is like, and yet we see so much of it in our life. And then I wondered even further. I was like, I wonder what it'd be like to open the curtain. Imagine how much light is on the other side of that just that little pinhole is bringing in all this light. If I could just throw open the curtain, and I was and my wife was asleep, so I couldn't do it. But I really wanted to, and I was thinking like the amount of warmth that I would feel, just the sun hitting me and the light coming in, and that would kind of like was my mind representing, like that would be what God's love would be like. To enter heaven would be like to have that full light just smack me. So when I was at my, or thinking I should say, about my dad's death, I was imagining that he gets that full light just coming upon him. And I don't feel one bit sorry for him. I don't feel sad. I would be sad, except he had Alzheimer's for 10 years, so I haven't known him, and I miss him from 10 years ago. But I'm certainly not feeling sorrow for his death. He is not just in a better, I hate that, a better place. That sounds so, not a better place, like way better place. Like he's in a wonderful, marvelous, fantastic place. In fact, I'm kind of jealous, if anything, So again, that's where my father's at now, and I'm happy for that. As Steve said, we're third generation. I'm third generation, right? I didn't ever really think about that, but it's true. We're third generation Grace, and we grew up very Grace, nothing else but Grace. Never heard anything but Grace from my house. When I look at what my father He was a pastor for, as Steve said, for 35 years. Or he didn't say that. He said 34 and 36. 35 years, which my mom had a lot to do with that, by the way. In fact, my mom's history goes back, I don't know if you're aware of this, but all the way back to her uncle in-law his name was Theodore Holdorf, and he was the first pastor of Worldwide Grace Testimony, which, if you don't know, that was Grace Missions International. So very first president was my mom's uncle. And you can see other people in that. I put the names on there because I knew a lot of you would know all those people going across. I even know I know who they are. How's that? Most of them are dead now. But so that was where my mother's history came from. And then my grandfather, my mother's father, was a Grace pastor in 3 different Grace churches. And he was the original, he was the second pastor at Elmhurst. The gentleman that I just had up there, Mr. Holdorf, he was the first pastor at Elmhurst. And then he also ran a mission on State Street in Chicago. And then, and few people even know about this, but my grandfather on the other side, my father's father, and he didn't go around telling everybody, I don't know why, I think I would tell everybody about this, but he was friends with Al Capone. And he became an evangelist. And his story was that he was running from the law, he had been in and out of jail 25 times, had 9 indictments against him, and serious ones. And he was hiding out in a mission and got saved by a guy named Robert T. Brown, which is, I've come to find out that's where my name came from because the mission head was Robert T. And so he got saved and eventually turned himself in. They dropped the charges because of his story of his salvation and his change. And so he then became mentored by J.C. O'Hare. And he was, my mom says he was called the go-to guy at North Shore Church in Chicago. And so one of the more interesting so we have a scrapbook with hundreds of articles because he traveled around the country doing his evangelistic work. And he had like a 20-foot chart that he got through J.C. O'Hare, the Plan of the Ages, and he had this, and he would go around and do this thing. Well, check out this little article here. It's very interesting. Following the funeral services of Tony Lombardo, getting a little mafia here, huh? Chicago labor leader who fell a few weeks back in the accepted Chicago manner with slugs in his body, a portly man surrounded by a small army of eagle-eyed, dark-complexioned men, turned in his large, sturdy, bulletproof sedan and shouted to a pleasant-looking man of 40, "Hi there, Louie." So that's my grandfather, Louie. "Hi there, Louie. How's the Jesus racket?" Louie, noticing the small army that kept close to the leader, nervously alert for any that might do harm to his person, laughed and answered, "Fine. I don't need any bodyguard." Isn't that nice? The portly man was Al Capone. The other, Reverend Louis D. Hill, ex-gangster, converted to religious life in 1923. And the difference between them was just as commented upon the latter, that he had no need of a bodyguard, that he was free from the constant weight that bears on a gangster's mind who fear of sudden violent death. So anyway, so both sides of my family came together at North Shore. And in fact, that's where my mom and dad, they met when they were quite young, and then got together again at North Shore. So anyway, that's where we come from, us Hills. So tonight, though, has nothing to do with that. I just wanted to talk about that. So I want to talk about the next generation. And today's ministry for tomorrow's growth was the name of this time that we're at right now. And you might wonder, I don't know if you wonder, I kind of wonder myself actually, what drives a 58-year-old man to be passionate about the next generation? So that's how old I'm, 58, and I am passionate about the next generation. And I'm, just so you know, I'm considering the next generation to be anybody from 13 to 30. So that's that whole group, 13 to 30 is who we're talking about. Well, number one is my love for them. I am really not a very soft-hearted guy, except to some people. But generally speaking, I'm kind of, I would like to be warmer, and so I'm sorry if I'm not. It's not, no offense, it's not what I want to be. I don't pride myself in it. I don't try to be that way. It's just who I am. But when it comes to students, and the students that I've come to get to know, I am just amazingly in love with them. I just love them. So that's number one, as I love students. Number two is that they are in a position that, for me, is like no other position. And if you've all of you are dealing with older people, I'm sure, and you get somebody that's ready to go after serving God, and then there's always a holdback. Oh, what about my job? I have this career I can't get out of, or what about I have this house I would have to sell my house, and then pretty soon they're not doing anything because they can't quite make those commitments, or they won't, or my wife isn't with me on this, or my husband. There's always, not always, but so often there's something that holds them back. Whereas when we're working with somebody that's young, what I love about it is they've made no commitments yet. And I'm trying to get them to surrender their life to Christ before they make any commitments, and help them to understand that there is no other reason to live other than for Christ. And so if there's no other reason to live, you don't want to go down this road and start making commitments and buying cars and buying houses and doing all these things that are going to start holding you down. And the person you marry is going to make all the difference in the world if they're not wanting to go into ministry with you. So to grab them when they're at this age, for me, is just huge. I want to get them now while they're still young and while they're still uncommitted. And number three is that I think that we as a church are in jeopardy of possibly not going under, but really downsizing. And this is true across the country. It's not just Grace churches, it's all churches, that we're losing the next generation. And I'm going to talk some more about that, what that looks like, what our statistics look like. I understand that this school is doing quite well, but across the board, probably in most of our churches, that is really not the case, and it's certainly not the case across the country. So what does today's ministry for tomorrow's growth look like? It might be better to put it something like that. Tomorrow's survival may be where we're really needing to think if we don't make some serious changes. So let me just talk about the landscape for a moment. First of all, even though the next generation is hard to reach, the opportunity for teens is actually not that way. Teens are much different than the older ones as they get into college. The statistic about teens looks something like this. Barna in 2006, for example, said overall, more than 4 out of 5 teens say that they have attended a church for a period of at least 2 months during their teenage years. So that's 81% is the actual number. 81%. That's a very good number. This represents substantial penetration and significant prospects for influencing the nation's 24 million teens. So that was in 2006. So 81%. So that means the teens are getting to church, which is awesome that we get all these teens in our churches. But can we keep them? You can get them, but can you keep them after high school? That's the issue. So we get them, but can we keep them? Are we doing the things that we need to do in order to keep them after high school is the point? Because once they hit that age of young adult, which we're saying is from 18 to 29, then that is when we start to lose them. And there's always been an issue where we have a gap, where they go off to college and they come back. And maybe most of you have probably, I shouldn't say most of you, but myself, how's that? We wander off, but then we come back. We understand our roots, and we think about our faith and our freedoms and things like that start to not be so important, and we realize that our faith in God really does matter. But that's not really the way it's happening. Now the generation gap is getting much wider than it ever was before. And how much wider is it going to get? And how is that influencing our congregations, and how is that influencing the point where if it gets too wide, then the children are no longer, they would get to the point where their children aren't there because they're too old. If our congregations get that old, then what happens? Are we going to be like England, where there's like 10% of the churches have no children? I don't know if you're familiar with that statistic, but 10% of the church, no children. That's crazy. I mean, because the average age got so old that the childbearing children weren't there. So there's, eventually you just have nobody following through. And so it's really important that we reach this generation. Another statistic is that a majority of 20-somethings, 61% that is, of today's young adults had been churched at one point during their teen years, but they are now spiritually disengaged. That is, not actively attending church, reading the Bible, or praying. 61%, according to Barna, that was back in 2006. So we could hope, well, maybe since 2006 things got a lot better, right? Good optimistic thinking, and the reason you laugh is because we know it's not true. However, Lifeway, their research from about the same time, you'll notice 2007 is the orange, they actually had it worse. They said it was 70% were no longer engaged, and that it actually got slightly better 10 years later. But when you read about that statistic, they say that it's really too small of a margin to say that it's a valid change. That it's really it's just too small, and so they think it's really about the same. At least there's no evidence that it truly is shrinking. But even if we go with the shorter number, it's still bigger than Barna's number. So you're still at 2/3. So 2/3 of the students go off to school or wherever they go after high school, and they don't come back. That's what we're finding out. So is college the culprit? Well, certainly not if they come to a Christian school. That's not the culprit, but that's not the overall issue. They're going off to colleges that are teaching things that are hardly Christian based, and so I kind of assumed that was it, and went by that assumption, and that is actually doesn't appear to maybe be the case. Now check this out. There seems to be this issue, and this is the way I kind of described it, or visualizing it, is that in middle school, they start having some doubts. So their doubts start earlier in life than maybe we're thinking. That in middle school, and because of today's society with so much negativity towards Christianity, we're a post-Christian society, they're starting to doubt earlier. And they're thinking, I didn't doubt at all till I was like 30-some years old, but they're starting to doubt young. And then when they get to high school, they're doubting a lot. And then by the time they get to college, then they're actually finally dropping off. So going, gone is that concept. And these are kids that grew up in church. So it's not like this is just generally. So you grew up in church, you go through middle school, pretty much a believer, but start to have doubts, hit college, high school, and have all sorts of doubts, go off to college, and finally you just drop off. And here's a statistic, and I say going, gone, just to show kind of what's going on, but the statistic is everything but the red, all right? So of 1,000 20 to 29-year-olds, evangelicals, who attended evangelical churches regularly but no longer do so, 95 of them attended church regularly during their elementary, middle school years. So we lost about 5%. So that's just the first little bit of going, having doubts in middle school. But 55% attended church regularly during high school. So we lost a huge amount between middle school and high school. Then by the time we get to 11%, we're still going to church during their early college years. So we might think, well, we lost them all in college, but did we really? It looks like we're losing them much earlier than that. And that was in 2011. And this is a follow-up. This is the same statistic at the top, the same group. Those who no longer believe that all of the accounts and stories in the Bible are true, 39.8 first had doubts in middle school. Then it goes up to 43.7 first had doubts in high school. And then another 10% had their doubts in college. So again, where's the real problem? It if I look at this, the biggest problem seems to be in high school. That's where we lose, but we're losing a bunch of them in middle school as well. And college, I don't know if it's enough to make the final boom, but it looks like the doubts were really occurring much earlier. So we had them. They came to church, and they were under our teaching. They were happy to be Christians for a long time. And then they started having doubts and more doubts, and they must not have heard enough so that by the time they go off to college, the final nail in the coffin, and they drop off. So I guess I wanted to just really make a statement that the next generation needs to be grounded. According to Colossians 2, we read about grounding before they become overwhelmed by the powerful winds of skepticism from our post-Christian society. So we need to get them before the winds start to come. We can't wait until somebody is, if somebody's drowning, it's not a good time to teach them how to swim. You got to get them well grounded before the winds come. In Acts 17:31, it says, because he has set a day on which he is going to judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he designed, having provided proof to everyone by raising him from the dead. The proof was in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That was the proof. And one of the things that I find weak when I speak to kids, I get a lot of kids that come to my group that are from other churches, and they'll say that they have just never heard of any evidence for the resurrection. That they think that it's just blind faith. Christianity's based on blind faith. And that is the common view. I hear most of them have heard that there are arguments about science, and that they don't know them very good, but they're aware that they're scientific arguments. They're aware of the philosophical arguments, but very, very, very few, I'm going to say almost none, are aware that there is significant historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And in fact, when I find that there are few even adults that are aware of this. And that is, and in this case, it's the minimal facts argument, which Gary Habermas has put forth, who is considered the world's leading expert on the resurrection. I put the web address up there because if you're not familiar with this at all, I really recommend that you go to GaryHabermas.com and check him out. Again, there's very few, if anybody names an expert, he's the top on the list. And next to him is a guy named Michael Licona, who was his protege, and he has a website called Risen Jesus. And between the two of them, these are three of the strongest pillars that they present because they are so well attested to by critical scholars, including skeptics. So even the skeptical scholars will agree to these statements. Critical scholars, over 95%. And Gary Habermas has spent over 40 years compiling in German, French, and English, I think, all of the opinions that are out there on all sorts of facts about Jesus studies, historical facts. And so he's able to make these statements because of all that research. And the first one being that Jesus died by crucifixion. So he didn't just die, but he died by crucifixion. So the whole idea of the Jesus mythers completely wipes out if we realize, and we're speaking to people, that did you know, if you're not a believer, did you know that the scholars all agree? I mean, like over 90, that's like if you don't believe in the Holocaust kind of difference. That the scholars all agree that there was a guy named Jesus. They all agree that he died by crucifixion. They all agree that shortly after the crucifixion that his disciples believed they saw the risen Jesus, which blows me away to think that the scholars that don't believe in the resurrection agree that the disciples were there and they actually saw in their mind the risen Jesus. Of course, the key issue is they don't think they actually saw the risen Jesus, but they believe they saw the risen Jesus, which is why they went to their death under persecution. And they also believe that Paul, the church persecutor, was converted. And with these three facts, you're able to refute all the naturalistic theories. You're able to refute that there was a swoon theory. You're able, because it couldn't be a swoon theory because Jesus died by crucifixion. You're able to refute the idea that the disciples stole the body. They couldn't have stole the body because they've already agreed that the disciples believed they saw the risen Jesus. And there's every single naturalistic theory is removed. And so today, the skeptics are agnostic because they say that every idea, every naturalistic concept has been answered. Mostly just by these three, but there's a whole long list of other things that they agree with. We just named these three because they're so important and so well attested to by even the skeptics. And so again, I wanted to point out these guys because it's so critical. Michael, this one on the left is probably the best book. If you have a youth person, I really recommend that you take a picture of that and have them buy that book on the left because it really nails down some of these arguments for the resurrection. The one at the top is really, in the middle, is really good for students because it's a guy that does cold, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a detective and he gives a detective kind of story answers for the historicity of Christ and the resurrection. And the guy on the right, that's like a 700-page book, so a lot of people aren't going to read that. But it's a very good book, and I recommend it. Again, he's a co-author with the one on the left, and between those two, they just present excellent arguments for the resurrection. So I say all this because I just feel that it is so, so important that this next generation know that there's evidence for the resurrection, that we're not believing just in blind faith. Every religion can claim an experience. Every religion can claim theistic arguments. Every religion can claim philosophical arguments because those are that there's a God. But only Christianity has historical arguments for a resurrection. There is no other religion that can be historically substantiated in any way. And they don't know that. And they think that Christianity is a myth. They think that we just believe it out of nowhere, and it's just, it's just good for your life to be a Christian. It's far more than that. We have substantial evidence, and they need to know that it's not just wishful, hopeful thinking, but that it's factual. So I gave a handout to you. I gave you several, actually. One that I gave you was this thick one, and it's it was a summary, and I just wanted to hit a couple things. So on the left, you'll know, I put the articles in white. I highlighted some things in yellow that match the going, gone, just so that you could see, that match the going, gone, or the grounded, just so that you could see all of the places where that comes up. So in this summary, James Warner Wallace names all sorts of studies that have been done on what's going on with today's Christians. Again, it's our young people really leaving Christianity. And so instead of reading about 30 books, you can get a quick summary of what all those books say and the key statistics behind them in this simple article. And all I wanted to do, though, the red on the left, that arrow, all I wanted to do is hit a few just to kind of give you a little backup on what I'm talking about. So if you go to page 6 is the first one, at the top of page 6. At the top of page 6, and I'll just read it. So I'm only going to read a few of these. Top of page 6, it's with the red arrow that's pointing down, and it's got the root under it. So if it's got the root, that means it's a grounding argument, okay? It's a reason why we should be teaching grounding. It says, book findings. Students leave faith behind primarily because of intellectual doubts and skepticism. Why did they fall away from the faith in which they were raised? This was an open-ended question. There were no multiple choice answers. 32% said that they left faith behind because of intellectual skepticism or doubt. Quote, it didn't make any sense anymore. Quote, some stuff is too far-fetched for me to believe. I think scientifically, and there is no real proof. Too many questions that can't be answered. It's sad to me when students think that this is true when it's just so far from the truth. The evidence is all on our side. I mean, whether it's scientific, philosophical, or historical, we have the evidence, and they don't realize it. The next page that I wanted you to check out would be on page 8. Nope, I'm going to be wrong on both of those. It's on 10. Page 10 at the top. In this seemingly unrelated study, researchers survey religious nuns. So nuns are people that are saying they have no religious affiliation. 78% who said that they were raised as a member of a particular religion before shedding their religious identity in adulthood, and asked them to explain in their own words why they no longer identified with a religious group. They discovered the following themes. About 50% said a lack of belief led them to move away from religion. This includes many respondents who mentioned science as the reason they do not believe in religious teachings, including one who said, "I'm a scientist now and I don't believe in miracles." Others reference common sense, logic, or lack of evidence, or simply say they do not believe in God. So science is another big one, and I would go into the science ones, but I think most of you are familiar with that. That's the only reason I'm not. At the bottom, there was another one I wanted to read. More importantly, the study found that most Americans who leave their childhood religion do so before reaching adulthood. 79% of young adults aged 18 to 29 who become religiously unaffiliated report making this decision during their adolescent and teen years. In years prior, those who abandoned religious belief reported doing so much later. Only 38% of people over the age of 65, for example, reported leaving their religion during their childhood years. So that's a going, gone statement there, just to kind of show you how often that comes up. And then page 11, we'll see another one and then I only have one more to go. The bottom of page 11, the presence or absence of doubt was found to be the single best predictor of Christian affiliation and spiritual health compared to several hundred other factors. Adults and teens who are younger, highly educated, knowledgeable, highly achieving, technologically engaged individuals who may have religiously diverse friends are the most likely to leave the faith. And then the last one was on the back of that page that I wanted to point to, and that was now speaking about Gen Z. And Barn has done the most comprehensive research, it's saying at the very top. But number A, I have a hard time believing that a good God would allow so much evil or suffering in the world. So we got to be able to answer that question. That comes up 29% of the time. We've got to have a good answer. C, I believe science refutes too much of the Bible, 20%. I don't believe in fairy tales. There are too many injustices in history of Christianity. Moving down, students in this age group struggle to reconcile science with the Bible. 24% side with science, up from 16% of boomers. Going down further, the church is a place to find answers to live a meaningful life, and which is a good thing there. So they're seeing church as a positive thing, but they're just assuming that even though it's positive, but is it true? The church is relevant for my life, 82%. And the last one, the church seems to reject much of what science tells us about the world, 53%. So anyway, I gave you the whole article just because I wanted you to have it. I want you to, it's just an excellent summary of what the state is that we're living in. So the big question at hand now then is, will the gap widen further with Generation Z? So Generation Z are the ones that are now just out of high school. They're saying it's maybe up to 22. You know, it hasn't been completely defined yet, but up to about 22. So the millennials, 23, all the way up to like 38, and now Gen Z. So we don't really have the statistics in yet to know, Is Gen Z going to walk away from the church and not come back? We don't know that. We just know that where they're at in high school right now and below. Here's just to give you an idea what Gen Z is. It's age 22 and under. Millennials up to, like I said, 23 to 38. So where is Gen Z? Well, Gen Z is first of all the first fully post-Christian generation. That means that we've been in a post-Christian society for a while, we say, but they're the first generation that has never seen anything but a post-Christian society. That's all they've ever known. And so what has that done to them? For one, they're twice as likely to be atheists. The students that I work with know so many friends that are atheists. I didn't grow up knowing atheists, did you? I knew that there were atheists out there. I heard about atheists, but even the people that I knew that weren't Christian, they wouldn't say, well, I'm an atheist. Well, it's really popular now at schools to say, I'm an atheist. You know, that is my position, and they're proud of it and own it. And it even goes further where it seems to be that there's even a general default position where it's almost like, yeah, of course I'm an atheist. I mean, don't be ridiculous. Where it used to be an atheist was more like a choice going uphill. Like, I am choosing atheism. I'm rebelling against my upbringing. I'm going atheist. Well, now it's not really, doesn't seem to be that way so much. It seems to be kind of more like that's the normal position, is to be atheist. Now, it's not totally true, but it's generally more the feeling that I'm getting than I certainly ever experienced growing up. Fewer than 10% of churches, however, place any emphasis on young adult ministry at all. And that's really why I'm bringing all this up, to tell you the truth. I'm bringing this up because I don't know if we're part of that 10%. Are you part of that 10%? Are we part of that 10%? Are we giving our attention to this generation, or are we letting it slide? Are we going to be like oxen to the slaughter when it comes to this issue? Just because it's difficult to address. It's these stupid kids, they're such a pain. And we got bigger fish to fry. So, but is that true? And that kind of attitude can make us be like oxen to the slaughter, where we hear it, we see it, but we keep on going the same way we've always gone, because it would take a major change, a major shift. We'd have to maybe apply more money. Or another question is teen and young adult ministry, in your mind, just babysitting? I hope not. I know a lot of people feel that way. I know that when you go to a lot of youth events or a youth group, they're run, in my opinion, like it's just babysitting. They're run like, let's just have fun, keep them busy, maybe sprinkle a little Jesus on top while, give them a little 5-minute story, but spend the most of the time just playing with them. And not just for relationship. If it was for relationship to go somewhere, that would be great. But it seems as though so much youth ministry is just to get through the message that's, we got 30 minutes we got to keep them busy for while the message is going on. Or youth group is really just have fun and games, give the parents a break. I don't even know. But if babysitting is the way we think of youth ministry, then they're not going to come back when they're over 18, because they haven't learned anything. They have no reason. In fact, so I grew up in church, and I got to say that I was not impressed with, I was unimpressed with church. In fact, I didn't like Christianity when I was in my teenage years. I thought it was goofy. I thought Christians were goofy. And I thought youth group was really goofy. I certainly wouldn't take any of my friends to youth group or church, because it just didn't, it smacked with, I suppose, insincerity. Not that I thought in those terms, but it just didn't seem like really about anything about God. It just seemed like, the whole thing just seemed kind of goofy. And so I think that came from the way that we were taught, and they were good people doing it, but I just don't know if the mindset was right, because it just didn't seem serious enough. It didn't seem like we were there reverently seeking God Almighty. It just didn't feel that way. It just felt like we were just having this fun little goofy class, is the way I felt about it. Another question I guess I have is, are you actively supporting the next gen in your church? It's not easy to get a next gen program going, especially the older ones. So it's not so hard to get the youth that are teenagers, but getting a program for the young adults, if you've tried to get that going, you'll probably agree that that is no small feat, if you're not in the right location anyway. And so are you supporting those efforts? Are you making sure that they have what they need, that the right person's in the right spot, etc.? Is that on your radar? Is that high on your priority list? Or is it that there's just not that much money? They don't, those young adults don't bring in any money. I realize that. And so they're not supporting your building. They're not turning the lights on. They're just a hassle. But they're the next generation, regardless of their problems and regardless what they don't do. So it really leaves you wondering, is it really worth it? All that effort, no money, it's so hard. Is it really worth it? Well, there was a book put out called Growing Young in 2016. And again, this is another great book I recommend if you're interested in growing your church young, is the idea, lowering the overall age of our churches. There were 6 key things that they found. And by the way, there's a handout on Growing Young that I passed out, and there's 2 sides to it. I'm not wanting to read the whole thing. I'm just wanting to hit these key points. And that is that churches that are doing well with young people, they find that they bring more service to the church. Young people, products these days, what do they always do? They always have a product, and it's supporting something somewhere, right? You buy a product, and young people don't want to buy products that aren't doing something. They have this mindset that our generations did not have, and that is, products aren't just for us. They're to support something somewhere. And so they bring that mindset to the church. And so it also helps us to serve more, because that's something that they want to do. So they bring more service. They bring more passion. They're young. They're excited. They find God, and they can't believe the new truths that they find. And they bring passion. They bring passion to the whole church. They bring innovation. They know more about technology than all of you. And me too. And they bring more money. Now, you say, now, I don't believe they bring more money. That's not true. Well, here's what it is. They don't actually themselves bring more money, but they bring people into your church. When people with money go to churches that have no young people, they're not as likely to want to stay there, because they can tell the church is not as healthy. People like to support churches that are making a difference, and making a difference with young people. And so when you have young people and they see a vibrant church with young people, they're much more likely to come, and they're wanting to give to the things that are going on in that church that are creating that. And they create more overall health. And I think that's just the intergenerational, healthy, get more perspectives, all of that come together to where you actually are doing your church more than just a favor of the fact that you're bringing in the next generation, which all in itself to me is reason to go all out and get that next generation. But they bring more to what you currently have in all of these different ways. So I was going to say I have this silver bullet to answer all of our issues, but I don't. What I have is my own little bit of a story of some things that I've I'm going to say learned. I don't know if they're true or not. I can just tell you it's my conclusions. There's different personalities. There's different situations. Church is a dynamic life. And I think you all know that you go to hear a speaker and there's no single answer. But these are some things that I'm doing and that I have concluded myself, and I'll explain why. And so, first of all, my vision is to have a thriving community of teenagers. Now, I made the teenagers red because the teenagers are the pipeline to the young adults. So the young adults are the ones we're missing. The teenagers aren't so hard to get. So teenagers turn into young adults. And so if we can get a solid pipeline of teenagers that are committed, then they turn into our young adult programs. Very hard to just, if you don't have young adults, in our church, we did not have many young adults, and there was a lot of talk to get young adults going, and I didn't hop in, Steve. I'll tell you why I didn't hop in. Because I knew that you can't just go out, hey, young adults, come, I'm 58 years old, I'm sure you'd love to hang out with me. That's not the way they're thinking, but when they're younger, they do actually like me, and then when they get older, then they stick with you, And so growing them up into a young adult program makes a lot of sense to me. So a thriving community of teenagers, which turn into young adults, passionately carrying out the work of the ministry. So the other thing is that my hope is not just that we keep them. Okay, we're going to get a bunch of teenagers, turn them into young adults, and then we have members. I think that this age is not too young for them to be completely fired up and ready to do the work of the ministry. I don't think the work of the ministry starts when you're 21 or 35 or something. I think it starts young. I see very passionate, even middle schoolers, especially the girls in middle school. It takes a little bit longer usually for the guys, but certainly by high school, I find a lot of interest, far more than I think the adults that when I was a kid, I don't think they thought we really could get that excited and get that committed. But the truth is that they become very committed and they are out there witnessing to their friends. And so for us to think that we're just in a holding pattern, I think is a huge mistake. They're ready to serve at a young age. And so the idea of them carrying out the work of the ministry, I don't think is for later, it's for now. They do the work of the ministry as they're teenagers, while they're next gen. This is my basic strategy. Roots to fruits, multiplied next generation, roots to fruits. Grounding them, and we've explained what the grounding is all about, making sure they're not going to blow away, that they're healthy in the faith, healthy in their walk with God. Moving them into then doing the work of the ministry, and then into discipling others. These are the next gen ministries that are currently I have running at our church. And so just to point out what kind of corresponds, the grounding, I do that really, I do that myself every single Sunday morning. It's about apologetical things. And the reason is that on a Sunday morning, it's hard to get into the deeper issues because you never know who's going to show up. And so to have a deeper sharing time is difficult. Whereas in a meeting where we're together for several hours away from the church, where we can have a very quiet worship and there's a more consistent people, that's where I have more of the personal time. So on a Sunday morning, though, I feel like that just really works out to be where I really focus on this is the foundational issues of the faith. And then the healthy, so there's a ton of things that are for the health. It just happens not to be Sunday morning. All those different times we do. And we focus probably more than any other thing. I focus on the love that is so great. I love this right here. A love so great. God's love for us is the most defining thing for the students that I work with. That issue alone seems to move them more than any other thing. And so that's probably the centerpiece of our healthy and giving our lives to Christ and things of that nature. And then ministry, all these different things have to do with ministry. Either they're learning to do ministry, or they're places that those who have moved up into ministry are practicing the work of the ministry. So in both cases. And then lastly, discipleship. I'm a firm believer in discipleship. We were here a couple of years ago, and discipleship was the thing we were talking about a lot. And I know, Scott, you were talking about your discipleship, and Steve has done. My father did a lot of discipleship. I don't know how many others. I'm a huge believer in discipleship, and that is probably the center method that we have for growing up ministry is through discipleship. And so even though there's not as many places we do it, it's the key methodology. So the next thing I wanted to do is explain a couple things that I've learned really more through failure than through success. I had a program about 20 years ago called High C, which stood for High College. And I learned some things from that. Just to give you an idea what it was like, it was 1999 to 2002. So I had about 35 to 45 students. It was from a few Grace churches. We all kind of combined to make this group. We had 5 to 7 college-age leaders that would kind of work with the students. We had a worship band. We had a prayer and share time. We had a skit almost every week that led into the message. I did a 30-minute message. We had small groups that followed up the message, so we'd break up into small groups and talk about the message. And then finally after that, we'd have games, and then we had a summer camp and a retreat. Looks like a pretty good program, doesn't it? That's what I thought. And so, and people would say, well, you're probably having too many games and stuff. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm doing a solid program, and it was a fail. And I finally stopped the program because there was enough going on inside the program with the kids that was what I considered bad. I started clamping down on the rules, and I just finally decided it really even wasn't worth happening. That's how much of a fail it was, even though I was doing all of the things that sounded like a good program. And really what it came down to was that it was dominated by non-spiritual kids. I had pulled together about all of these kids at once, and it was in a rough place. This was a place, Commerce City. If you've ever been to Colorado, it's considered, it's like inner city Detroit. And to have 45 kids, mostly from that area, all at once, they influenced each other more than I realized I could ever influence them from the front. Even with the college leaders, they just had too much going on with them, amongst them, that was so much more powerful than I could bring from the front or they could bring in their small groups, that it just never seemed to make a difference. I just never could get a foothold, And so it reminded me, High C felt like trying to start a fire with wet wood. And when I think about that, here's my illustration, that fire is the spirit and wood is people. And so we'd like to have a fire, right? We'd like to have the spirit taking hold of people's lives and just burning like crazy. And we're the fire tenders. And so we gather the wood, we gather the people, we try to light the fire, we have the spirit, and we're trying to make a difference. And the wet wood then would be those students that aren't that interested, in fact, disinterested. So I kind of felt like I had this large group of wet wood kids, and I was running around with a lighter trying to light this thing. That's what it felt like that I was trying to do. And no matter how fast I'd run around, the wood just never caught fire. And that's just the way it was. Have you ever tried to start a fire with wet wood, by the way? Has anybody tried to do that? Because I have. There was a time that I was thinking about it, and it's kind of funny that I tried to start a fire with wet wood when my parents were here 45 years ago. And Debbie and Steve, my brother-in-law and sister, they were going to school here. And this was like in 1974, I figured out. So in 1974, I was about 14 years old, and I was back at home, and my two little sisters with my parents, I was back at home building a fire. And there was wet wood. I had gone sledding, came home, and there was no wood, and I wanted a fire. And so I wanted a fire, so I got this wet wood from outside and put it all in there, and I was like, how am I going to get this wet wood started? So I go out in the garage, and I look around, I find, oh, here's some lacquer thinner, that'll work. And so I get some lacquer thinner, and I come in, and we had these cups that were steel cups that were popular back then, and they were 12 ounces, so I know how many ounces I put on the fire, because I put 3 full cups of lacquer thinner on that wood. I figure this will get this thing going, right? So I pour all this on there, and I put the can back here a little bit. I keep it away from the fire. I was pretty smart. And so I take the match, and I kind of light it and throw it. And I've done this a lot of times before, this kind of similar things anyway. Throw the match out there, and I knew the flames would pull out, but I didn't know how far they would pull out. And they pulled out, and they pulled out, and I was moving back, and I just couldn't even believe how far they were pulling out. And they just kept pulling, and my elbow hit the lacquer thinner, and all over the floor it went, including under the couch. It was a tile floor, and of course the fire jumped, and so pretty soon I had all this stuff was burning all around me. And I know a little bit about explosion, because I've made things that explode out of cans. And so my fear was that the can was going to explode, because there's enough oxygen getting in the can, and the fire is going to blow up the can. I'm going to get shrapnel. So I decided that I don't want shrapnel on me. So I run in the kitchen, and I get a big pot, a heavy-duty pot, and put it over the can so that it won't explode on me, and just go a little poof, And so once I got that out of the way, the next thing was to stop the fire, which was now, the couch was now on fire. Okay, so the couch is now burning, and that was the next thing to do. So I ran into the kitchen again, and first I tried some water, a few things of water, and it was made of nylon. And nylon is kind of like a plastic. It just kind of drips, and once it gets going, it doesn't want to go out. And so then I got a broom, and I was hitting it with the broom, and that thing just was hard to get out. But I eventually did get the fire out, and it took a while. So I got the fire out, and I lifted the pot up, and it had sunken through the tile. I made a mark where that was. And so, and all along, my parents are right here listening. And so got that out. And so then I moved the couch into the middle of the room. I can't remember why, just because it was burnt. And so there was a lady that was staying with us. Her name was Debbie Bassett, and she lived with us. And she was, at the time, I don't know, maybe 30 years old or something. And so everything was fine. She came home, and your Debbie, this is what happened, So we're watching TV in the other room, and lo and behold, it caught fire again. And it was burning. And there's something about this nylon that just re-burns. And so it re-burnt, and then we put it out again, and got that and soaked it this time. And we watched TV some more, and lo and behold, that thing caught fire again. And so you just can't put those things out. So then we took it out back. Finally, she said, we need to take this outside. So we took it out back, and everything was fine, except that in the middle of the night, the fire department came and woke us up, because apparently it flamed up again, caught the wood pile on fire, and then was burning the side of the house, and the house was on fire. And the neighbor had got up in like 2 o'clock in the morning and saw the fire and thought we were having a weenie roast at 2 o'clock in the morning, and called the fire department. They came, and of course, to put out the fire, broke the sliding glass door because of the heat. And so the door was broken, and then they came and woke me up, make sure I was fine. And so, anyways, a few things went wrong there. And when I got then, I was fine. But when my parents came home, Debbie and I met them at the door. Not this Debbie, but this other Debbie. And they came in the door, and we decided to hit them with it right away. You know, it's best just to not wait around. And so we said, you know, we had a little bit of a problem while we were gone. And my dad, I told you I love my dad. He said, well, is anybody hurt? I said, no. And he said, well, it can't be that bad. Okay, that's the kind of response I'm liking, right? Can't be that bad. And then we told them what happened. And they weren't too upset because I didn't try to start the fire. And so, and in fact, in the end, he said, next time do it in the living room because we need to replace the carpet in the living room. And the insurance covered it all. So what I learned from that, though, is a lot of things got ruined. But guess what happened to the wet wood? The wood never burned. The wet wood never burned. After all that, you can't burn wet wood. That's what I learned. You know, you can't burn wet wood. And so what I learned about this is that I will never again allow wet wood to dominate my group. When it comes to getting a group going, and you have certain people that just won't let you get your fire started, I have decided that I am just not going to let that stop. And when we're dealing with young people, they have a crazy amount of power over each other. You know, the kids that are not interested in God will laugh at the kids that are. And we really want to help those kids that are laughing. I get that. But it seems like it just isn't the right place at the right time, making it so difficult for this other group. I mean, the truth is, how do you get a fire going? The way you get a fire going is you work really intently with dry wood, and you focus on that wood. You blow on it. You do everything you can to nurture carefully that dry wood until it gets going. And you take care of it, and you make sure that wet wood is not smothering that dry wood. You've got to keep it airy. And I feel like it's the same thing. If you're trying to start a group, whether it's young adults or high school or even middle school, this isn't so much the case with adults because they just have more respect and they're not going to do that, or they won't come, right? But this is not the case with our youth, that their parents will send them. They'll send, the worst kids get sent and the good ones don't have to go. And so you've got to do something about that. And so I really decided that I wasn't going to do that again. And so when I ended up having this opportunity at a harvest, and I didn't think that I'd ever do it again, but I did. I thought that we had a need, and I was like, I'll jump in there with the youth, and then ended up really falling in love with them. But I was like, I am not going to let that happen again. And so I decided to protect that group and to really focus on the dry wood and get that dry wood going. And then as you get the dry wood going, and again, and doing that by spending time with that one person. So I'd encourage you that when you're working with your leaders, to focus on that person that will get the fire going. Because if you just can't start it all at once, you got to really focus on one spot. Secondly, it needs to be a God-centered program. So many of these programs are not God-centered. It's like all about fun because we're doing everything to keep everybody there, but it's not about anything. So what's the point? And we might say, well, you know, you got to have some of the ones that are coming are affecting the others, and I can't keep it God-centered. Well, then we go back to square one. How do you get a fire going? You start and you make sure that the one is in, get the fire going first. And then once you get a fire going, then you can continue that fire going by adding some more dry wood, adding a little bit more, getting it bigger, getting it hotter, and slowly getting a stronger and stronger group. Our group is called Not a Fan because it was made after a book. You probably heard Not a Fan. And so we have a Not a Fan club, was the idea. And so it was not based on a fun thing. And we spent 3 hours, and for all of last year, we didn't even have games. It was 3 hours of serious time. You know, we had a lot of newer young kids come through this year, so we do have games again, but it's still 2 hours of very serious time, worship and times discussing together, one-on-one times, as well as small groups. And so it's very God-centered. Another thing is it needs to be a safe place to share and grow. Again, if it's not safe, they will not share. I ended up, in my situation, really laying down the law and saying it needs to be a safe place. In fact, I have this box, and I have stickers on it that look like this. And we call it fragile. And they all understand what fragile means. Fragile means you got to treat each other right. You got to be there wanting to pursue God. You want to be diligent, meaning you got to do the things that we ask about whether you're reading the books and stuff, be faithful. You have to be willing to share, not maybe the first week or so, but we're saying, you need to participate. You need to be respectful of each other. You need to be kind. You need to be confidential, not telling everybody, and you can't be caught doing stuff on your phone, like looking at porn or whatever it is. And so we put this on the box, and everybody signs the box. So I have this big box, everybody signs and agrees to this. And the reason this becomes so important is because if it's not a safe place, they won't grow. They just won't, because it doesn't take much going on before the whole environment becomes shallow. If we want committed followers, then we have to have a safe place. Again, this doesn't come up much for adults because they just won't come. But with kids, they will show up, and they will destroy the atmosphere, and they will try to pull the other kids away. Now, once you have a hot fire, it is different because when you have a hot fire, can you add hot wood to a fire? Can you add wet wood to a hot fire? Yes, you can. But you can't start with wet wood. So we are at a point now where I don't care who comes anymore. The environment is strong enough; it just doesn't matter. So then, lastly, we get into our serve team, and that is moving into our mission and being able to develop ministry and as well as discipleship. We have a serve team, and it's all about discipleship. It's based on discipleship. We have weekly discipleship meetings, and it lasts for a few hours. Discipling is the key way that we grow our people. We talk. We talk about their life issues. We share. We discuss things. We also have an internship program, and I passed out a postcard just so you could read a little bit of what that's like. Again, that's based on discipleship primarily. And for us, discipleship, more than any other thing, every week we come together a couple times a week in our internship program, and it's about 3 hours long. And we spend the first hour is always worshiping, sharing, just talking about what's going on in life. What I have found that is if they're doing well spiritually, they will do amazing things. If they're not, it doesn't matter how much I teach them, nothing's going to go right. And so focusing on their spiritual life is always by far the most important. And so again, our vision is a thriving community, starting with teenagers, which creates the pipeline. Progress is slow, I got to admit. It's not like things are just like all blossomed and it's all fun and dandy overnight. It's been slow. But we are definitely building momentum. So anyway, that's it. Didn't know if you had any questions.